Welcome to Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Meg Heaton, and for almost 30 years, I was a reporter for the Hudson Star-Observer. Now, since my retirement, I've been working with the River Channel to present people and topics of interest in our community. And as we are all aware, COVID-19 has presented us with some very unique and challenging things to talk about. And to speak to one of the biggest challenges the virus has presented to the community is Dave Grambow, the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning for the Hudson School District. I came to know Dave when I was a school reporter for the Star-Observer. He was a teacher before becoming a member of the administrative team, and most importantly, he is a dad who can understand the challenges Hudson parents are facing as the school year approaches. Welcome, Dave, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Meg. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To get started, can you just give us an idea of what going back to school in Hudson will look like this fall?
Sure, absolutely. Well, it will look like nothing we would have ever anticipated. It's certainly a unique set of circumstances we find ourselves in. So everything has been turned upside down, and it's presented a unique opportunity for us to take a really fresh look at everything we do and make the best of this situation. So essentially what we'll be doing, and we'll get into the specifics, I'm sure, as we carry on here this afternoon, but we're trying to offer as much choice as we can to families to meet their needs. And we have essentially a full spectrum of services we'll be offering that starts from the basis of school on-site, in person, and then a lot of choices from that point.
So that said, when is the first day of school technically?
So first day of school is September 1st, so right around the corner. Last Friday, we had all of our new teachers for the first time, which was a wonderful time. And I know, Meg, you've been involved in the chamber luncheons many times. And it was so fantastic to see all the smiling new faces and the excitement, and good to remember. It's a great profession, even though we have all sorts of challenges this year. To see that positivity was absolutely heartwarming. And we have the rest of our teachers starting tomorrow. So all the veteran teachers start tomorrow, and they'll be in service Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Monday. And then Tuesday, we'll start with our kids.
Wow. And so we are planning to have all the kids come back to in person if their parents opt for that, right?
Yeah, if their parents opt for that. So right now it's tracking about 85% of our families are interested in coming back on site in person September 1st. We offer a few different alternatives, primarily our individual distance learning, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's tracking very strong that parents wanted their students to come back in person as soon as September 1st.
And obviously, you know, the elementary kids are one thing, middle, secondary. How is that going to look differently from years past? Are kids going to have the same teacher, or how is it going to work, Dave?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. It varies from level to level. Our basic guiding principle is that we know what we do is essential for kids. And our kids need school. And we've learned it in ways that we probably knew in the back of our minds, but it never really came to the forefront because we're so focused on the curricular, extracurricular, and co-curricular activities, but we lose sight sometimes of the other things that school does for all of our students, the social emotional aspect, the mental health aspect. All of that is so critical. So when we think about what it will look like, we set our sights on making sure it is as close to the typical as possible, with a full continuum of mitigating strategies to make it as safe as possible, knowing full well that we can't guarantee a COVID-free environment, but implementing as many mitigating strategies as we possibly can. So at the elementary level, it will be students with their teacher as they typically would have. What we're asking is that teachers collaborate even more than they have in the past. And collaboration is such a huge element of what we do. But we're asking that they stay very tight with their curricular delivery so they can collaborate with one another. They can help out in times of need, whether that means perhaps a teacher is out because they've been considered a close contact to someone who tested positive. We need to be ready to pick up from that point forward. At the middle school level, in a way is probably in the best position because they've been using Google Classroom to a pretty high degree for quite a few years now. And Google Classroom is what we call our LMS, or Learning Management System. It's the platform that students will use to access the curriculum, and it will also essentially be the platform where students can meet with their teacher if they're not on site. So middle school, that's how they will operate. And the high school, for the most part, typical delivery with some adjustments in some classes that just can't be held the same as they typically would. For instance, career technical education, choir, band, some pretty significant adjustments in those areas, but your core classes, for the most part, will look very similar.
And will there be a limit on the number of kids that can be in a classroom at any given time?
So yeah, we have class size guidelines, and those class size guidelines will remain in place. We're being a little bit more liberal in terms of capping classes to make sure that we're not crowding them. But we will be running classes from 20, 24, 25 students. A few might creep up a little bit higher, especially if they're in a larger space, so the students wouldn't be as close with one another.
And we're following the guidelines in terms of CDC guidelines for distancing and masks and all that stuff?
Absolutely, for masks, and we have the mandate from Governor Evers, which in many ways helped us out because it offered some clarity, and clarity is the name of the game right now. The CDC guidelines on physical distancing, we'll do our best to maximize physical distancing whenever possible. A lot of strategies in place. We have clear plastic barriers that have been ordered and will be in place day one to maximize the separation between students at all levels. We have spaced out our classrooms as much as possible. Teachers have done a great job of taking a fresh look at their classroom and getting rid of those things that might not be so necessary to maximize that space as much as possible. We have our hallways in most buildings are marked for one-way traffic, especially at the high school. As you know, that's a bit of a maze, so wanting to make sure that we have clear sites of our traffic plans for students in the schools. So a lot of strategies to maximize that physical distancing.
Wow. And what will the instruction actually look like? I mean, in terms of changes or what people are used to doing, kids working in groups. I know there's a lot of group education that goes on in these situations. What's going to be different about this year?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Meg, because as you said, working collaboratively with a group of students is essential to a lot of our curricular areas. I'll share a specific example. Last year, we implemented to full scale a new middle school math program. And it's based on the assumption that students will work in groups and they will be assigned specific tasks. They'll be responsible for their own learning, but they'll also have an element that is very collaborative. So what we're doing with that class as an example is whenever we have opportunities to use at middle school the house spaces, we're allocating that for math instruction, knowing that that's the one area where group work is most essential. Now, group work will look different. Students will have their masks. They won't be huddled up as close as they would have been in the past. They'll be spaced out. Mm-hmm. Now, if group work is not necessary, then we'll have students working independently. So there will be more independent work than we typically would see, but that doesn't mean that there won't be group work or partner work at certain points throughout the day. Another thing we'll do is limit the amount of time. So they might be working in a group, but instead of having that be for a 48-minute class period, it might be for 10 or 15 minutes of that class period, and then they're working independently for the remainder of that instructional time.
Okay. Did we learn some things from the, and it sounds like you did, from the experience of last spring, going remote like that are impacting how you're doing things this fall?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the number one thing we learned, and again, this is an example of something we knew, but it reminded us. The number one resource we have for students and their learning, it's not the curriculum and the professional development. I'd love to say it's the assistant superintendent of teaching and learning, but it's not that. It's the teachers. The teachers make the difference. Mm-hmm. And this spring, we had quite a bit of asynchronous learning. Asynchronous means that the teacher and the student are not online together. They're not in the same place, Teachers are offering resources, students are working independently. And hats off to our teachers and our school administrators, our instructional coaches that really gave it a good go. But it just wasn't something that could be sustained, and we'd expect that students would continue to learn at the rate we'd want to see, and more importantly, that they would feel the support that they need. So that was the number one lesson. So this year, our plan for students that will not be on site is a synchronous model, meaning the teacher and the student will be together, whether that's on site or online, for the vast majority of any instructional period.
Oh, even if a kid is doing it from home.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. Even if they are, if they're experiencing education from home, what we're doing is we've developed what we call individual distance learning. And there are other districts that are doing things similar, but I do believe that our program is unique. And we put a flag in the ground and said, we're going to do the best we can to make sure that students and teachers are together, whether they're at home or not. So what individual distance learning looks like, the students would be home and they would have access, they would log into a Google Meet very similar to our Zoom meeting right now, and they would have a view of what's happening in the classroom. Now the cameras are set up so they're looking at the teaching wall. We have our smart boards, our Epson boards, and the teachers will be providing the bulk of their instruction from that space. We went in and we taped off the area so a teacher knows when I'm in the blue square, I know I'm on camera, and they'd be providing that instruction so that kids at home are part of that instruction. Now, it might shift. Say the lecture or the direct instruction is 10, 12, 15 minutes. At that point, the teacher might say something like, okay, boys and girls, at this point, we're going to work independently, and I would like you to go into your Google Classroom, click on this link, and follow these directions. That could be happening exactly the same at home as it is on site. Now, sometimes there'll be some differences. Sometimes the teacher might say something like, if you're an at-home learner, what I'd like you to do is click on this link and do step A, B, and C, and we'll check back in 10 minutes. For our on-site learners, we'll be doing the following few things. So there will be some differences, but again, guiding principle, keep it as close as possible so we have as equitable of a teaching and learning experience as possible.
So in terms of the give and take between students, students asking questions or, in a discussion type of thing, off-site learners will have the same access as kids sitting in the classroom?
They will, and that is an absolutely important element of what we're doing. We want to make sure that just as a student in the front row can raise their hand and say, Mrs. Johnson, can you help me with this? The students at home would have that same access. Now, it might look a little different. They might have a bell or a signal that says, okay, I have a question. One of the things we'll be working with students and teachers on is the 45-degree rule. What that means during work time, instead of having a student log out, they'll just put the screen of their Chromebook at a 45. The teacher, in scanning the distance learning look, they'll see, okay, I'm looking at the keyboard. That means that student is just fine, doesn't have a question. If they then open it up, then the teacher would know, okay, I'm looking at student and they might have a question. It will take some getting used to. It's an entirely new classroom management scheme for teachers, and teachers spend countless hours working on sort of refining the logistics and the flow of their classroom. This is a major, major change for them. So it'll take a while for us to refine exactly what we're doing, but always aiming to have that experience at home closely match the experience on site.
So this will be different from what was going on in the spring, because it seems like a kid will go to school all day, right? I mean, like a typical day. Will they be with their teachers most of the day, or except for the breaks for whatever, recess or whatever?
Right, yeah, so for the majority of the day, yes, that's true. We anticipate, and we've done some estimating, it could be upwards of about 4 hours of instructional time in front of the computer. But during those 4 hours, even during that time, it's not staring at the screen the entire time.
Sure.
That is something we're concerned with, and we're doing our best to limit screen time. But we understand if we're engaged in virtual education, it will be heavy on the screen time. There are certain classes that will be done asynchronously. As an example, FIET. So physical education just doesn't translate very well to individual distance learning. A student wouldn't get much out of watching their classmates participate in a physical education activity. So that would be a time where the physical education team actually, they give a menu of options for the at-home learners, and that can be done asynchronously on their own time. That does two things. One, it creates a better educational experience because it doesn't translate well to individual distance learning. Two, that gives a screen break for that student. So that would be 35 minutes for the student, I'm speaking at the elementary level, for the 35 minutes where they wouldn't be on screen. A few other classes where it will be primarily menu based. Most of our specials, in fact, music, art, and phy ed would operate that way. Art, a little bit different in that they will participate in the mini lesson, the beginning, but then they'll go on their own to practice the skills that were being explored in that class period.
How is something like band and chorus, how is that going to work, Dave, where you have to be far apart or whatever?
Yeah, band and choir are two of the most challenging areas in this COVID environment because of the aerosol spray that would happen when you have a room full of people singing or a room full of people playing instruments. This would, something we learned that who would have ever thought the flute is one of the most risky instruments. So for all you flautists out there, you can feel pretty tough to know that you have one of the most risky instruments out there. So
they're gonna make Marvel movies about
exactly. Yep, the flautist,
the mad flute player.
So we're looking very carefully at that. The big thing we're doing is limiting the number of students in any space. Okay. So we did a pretty close analysis of every space where music instruction takes place, and we set a limit of the number of students that could be on site. We're also encouraging outside playing and singing whenever possible, but there will be pretty significant limits on what can happen. We'll reconsider, most of the decisions we'll reconsider at about semester time, about halfway through the year, see how things are tracking, see if there's new technology that makes things easier to implement, but some pretty significant adjustments. We're lessening the focus on performance and increasing the focus on individual skill development. So there'll be more things like sight reading happening, more music theory happening, and not as much on the performance side.
So we can't expect a Christmas concert this year?
Likely not, but we are looking at ways we can still, what we'd love to be able to, there's all sorts of things obviously we have to watch, but still looking at creative ways to still entertain the community. We know we have some traditions that are very valued in the community. Our music team has been fantastic. When we met with every single curricular area, had a meeting to talk about what will this look like. For example, what will this look like for high school English language arts? What might this look like for middle school math? What might this look like for elementary social studies? Every single group had at least one, if not several meetings, and the meetings were fantastic. The music group knew up front that they are in a unique curricular area, and they came with great ideas, very forward-thinking, very focused on solving problems and addressing issues.
Great. So I'm assuming you've heard an awful lot from parents as the decisions have been made going forward. What are you doing to support these people or the families while they're making their decisions about what to do? I think it's pretty impressive that you've got 85% of them coming back.
Yeah, we knew the number would be high. We didn't know it would be that high. We had been hearing from families that were strongly encouraging us to do as much as we can to stay open. And our support for families is very important because we know this is an incredibly stressful time for families as they're juggling their priorities, trying to figure out what it looks like to go back to work and to get their kids to school and take care of their kids. And I know we have families that don't have the luxury of being able to go back to work. So we're very sensitive to that and doing our best to support families. So a couple things we're doing. Communication is the name of the game. So for every family that expressed an interest in individual distance learning, they received a phone call from their principal or an associate principal at the secondary level to talk through specific plans for their child. That's a tremendous amount of time for our principals to be spending on the phone with families. It was pretty neat to hear the principal's reflection on this. To a person, every principal said it was a lot of time, but it was worth it. The calls were very positive. They felt supported as principals, and they felt that they were able to offer that support to families through those calls. That was a tremendous undertaking. We're actually still not done. There's a number of families that haven't completed the original survey that indicated what their interests were. So then we're calling all of those families as well, because we want to know, obviously, for sure, where students will be September 1st, whether that's on-site or involved in individual distance learning, or if they're going to look at an alternative plan. Another thing we did that I think was very supportive, we had members of our IT department and our teaching and learning department work on a day in the life videos, and we sent those out to all families. We had teacher leaders and volunteer students come in, and we created videos that helped families see, what will this individual distance thing look like? How will it feel, and what will the interactions be, and how will my student connect with their teacher? So we created short videos, 4 or 5 minute videos that ran through a series of little vignettes of what it might look like with transitions and small group instruction and direct instruction and sanitizing procedures and all those things. I think those were very helpful to families. We noticed once those sent out, our number of undecided parents dropped pretty considerably. So we were happy about that. And then we have our blueprint that we created, and Tracy Habish-Aline has taken the lead on creating the blueprint, which is a wonderful guiding document, and it's a living, breathing document. It just changed not too long ago. As we learn more, as we refine our plans, we update that blueprint. And I love the analogy of the blueprint. It came to me as I was thinking about what's the value of a blueprint. And I was thinking about any of us that have ever gone through any sort of home building or home remodel. You go through this design process, and you're talking about all these wonderful things you want to do, and then the building starts, and then the contractor speaks to you and says, well, you know what, this isn't going to be able to work quite the way we had planned, and you make some adjustments. So how the blueprint was originally designed and what you actually implement are close, but not identical. And I believe our blueprint operates the same way. There are adjustments that need to be made, and we'll make those adjustments. We'll stay flexible, we'll stay fluid, we'll stay responsive to the needs of our community and adjust as we need to. But I think that blueprint was a wonderful support for our families.
It sounds good. It sounds good. How about teachers? How are you supporting your teachers going? Are most of our teachers coming back? I mean, have we lost any to this, or?
The vast majority are coming back and are excited to come back. Is there some anxiety? Certainly, and it's totally understandable. We joke a little bit about, and we don't joke about it now during COVID, but pre-COVID, there's sort of a teacher joke that goes around about the dreams you start having as a teacher about August 1st. You start to have these goofy school dreams, and I won't say it's universal, but it's pretty common because you just worry. You're off for a while, and it's a new class and new expectations, and you're so concerned, you want to make sure you do a great job, so things start floating through your mind. And I remember those dreams vividly. They've now transitioned just to Sunday night dreams for me. I don't have the luxury of just August anymore. But you go through this process of all these things that are legitimate concerns. Mm-hmm. Then you take a global pandemic and you plop that on top of all the regular concerns that teachers go through. And it produces some worry that is completely understandable. So there are some teachers that have had to make some individual choices, but for the vast majority, teachers are coming back, and they're remarkably positive. We've been meeting with different groups of teachers. I talked about the Return to Learn meeting. We have our Teacher Advisory Council, which is a group of K-12 teacher leaders that we've been learning from and learning with as well. So that whole process is it can be overwhelming, but as I mentioned, with the new teachers coming in Friday, you get that little glimpse of, I just can't wait to get all our teachers back. I'm looking forward to having everyone on site. And then the big day, of course, is when we have the students back. So that's one of the things we're doing, is we're just understanding what's happening. We've tried our best to strip away all of the extra stuff that we tend to load on teachers' plates in these last few weeks in August. There is never enough time for professional learning. There's always more we can do, but we have to be judicious, and we have to make sure that in any year that we don't overload teachers, because there's only so much they can digest when they're thinking about the critical first day with their kids. This year, obviously, it's all that much more important. So we've stripped away that to increase the amount of time that teachers have on their own or with their team of teachers to plan and get ready for their first few weeks with their kids. And then the other thing we've done is we've offered a lot of very specific training. As you can imagine, having a camera on you the entire time you're teaching, broadcast to all of your students' homes, can be a little disconcerting. And I understand. I'm trying to think if I was in the classroom how I'd feel about that. And some teachers are very comfortable with it, but others, it like I said, can be a little disconcerting. So we're offering a lot of training. A few folks in my department, so Ivy Wheeler, Lisa Scoyne, the Assistant Directors of Teaching and Learning, and then Jen Lotzi in Instructional Technology, created what they call individual distance learning simulations. It is a fabulous training module that allows teachers to sort of experience individual distance learning without a camera on you, without being broadcast in the classroom, and quite honestly, without the students. So more of a tabletop exercise. So that's another way we're supporting our teachers. The videos we created also work great for helping teachers see what does this look like. And we made sure that we picked fantastic teachers that have the respect of their colleagues to be in these videos so they can see, yep, I believe in that individual, that teacher. So that helps a lot. And then probably most importantly is one word that has become the mantra of many of us as we approach the year, and it's grace. We need to provide grace to our students, to our families, and especially to our teachers. This is a tremendous undertaking. We know that the job of a teacher changes, and the pressures that teachers face, they increase every year. And like I said, with this addition of a global pandemic on top of everything else, we need to provide that grace as much as possible and know that we're going to continue to learn together, that we are truly all in this together, and we'll get through it, and we're going to have a great experience for our kids.
Well, maybe if we can't have a high school musical in the spring, we could perhaps have the Emmy Awards for the best teacher on camera or something.
Yeah, I like it.
I think that I can think of some that would be very, very good on camera. So,
absolutely.
In the event that we would have to go to a hybrid model or a virtual model, what will instruction look like then?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we put a lot of thought into this too. So we knew early on if the data that we were receiving was consistent, that our goal was to start the school year on site. But we also knew that we may had to have changed that plan as late as last week. But the data that we're seeing is still suggesting that we're able to move forward with an on-site program. But we've created a set of metrics that will guide our decision making. I feel very confident that we have a good plan. The reason I stand so firmly behind this plan that we developed is that it considers two primary sources of data. One would be the county data related to COVID rates over 14 days. And then the other set of data that we're going to consider would be absence rates in our buildings that are related to COVID. And those are both very important sets of data. So as we look at that information, we've created a matrix, which essentially in the upper left-hand corner would be open on site, and in the lower right-hand corner, as we move to a more restrictive model, all the way to a fully virtual model. And again, that decision will be made based on those two data points that I just discussed. Regardless of where we are, the assumption is it's going to look a lot like individual distance learning. The variable is the number of students. So in a typical individual distance learning class, a teacher might have, say, 17 kids in the classroom and 8 at home experiencing individual distance learning. Well, if we go to a hybrid model, we take that class of, say, 24 students, and we'd split it into a group of 12 and another group of 12. And our hybrid model, as we have it planned right now, would have a group of students attending school Monday and Tuesday, a different cohort of students attending school Thursday and Friday, and then Wednesday would be a flip-flop back and forth. So one week you'd have 3 days of instruction in a row, and another week 2 days of instruction in a row. And that plan was intentional in that we think a few consecutive days will help establish routine and allow a teacher that wants to dig into something in a little bit more detail that time without that long break between that on-site experience with their kids. But as I said, the difference is that the number of students. It would still be synchronous for the most part, where students and teachers can communicate even on those off days. So we would work on a model that would be slightly adjusted. Now, if we go fully virtual, that would be slightly different because we would likely modify the schedule. We can't really modify the schedule if we're on a hybrid model because we still have students on site experiencing the typical day. But if we go fully virtual, we'll likely modify the schedule slightly. So we would concentrate the direct instruction, and then the rest would offer a little bit more flexibility for a student to work at their own pace with some office hours available.
And Dave, what are the with regard to our kids with special needs or our special education classes and stuff? I know that that's covered under an entirely different department too, but you're obviously the district's made allowances for that as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, a lot of consideration has gone into meeting the needs of students with special needs, whether we're talking about a learning disability or gifted and talented or some reading support on a periodic basis, math intervention, whatever that might be. We will be delivering the instruction. Now, if the student has an IEP, we'll meet the IEP. There may need to be modifications made. If those modifications are made, it would be done collaboratively with the family with slight modifications to the IEP. But it's a really important thing to keep in mind. We know, again, going back to how I opened our conversation, we believe what we offer our students is absolutely essential. We also know that when you stray from the model that we've developed, it creates holes. And it can exacerbate existing inequities. We have to be very vigilant to make sure that we are doing our very best for our students that need us the very most. And that may look like schedules that are modified. It may look like some additional support outside of what we consider that traditional instructional time. And what it surely will mean is a lot more collaboration between special educators and general educators as we work to meet the needs of all of our kids.
And I would assume too that the counselors and those support services that the district has always provided through school social workers and psychologists will continue as well.
Absolutely. And their role, again, more critical than ever because of what I just said, the exacerbating of inequities. The counselors, the school social workers, school nurses, another group, their work has been so incredibly important. I am so proud of one statistic that we can share with confidence from last spring, and that is every single student was contacted. Every family had a conversation with a trusted adult in the school. Every family, we made sure they felt like they had what they needed. That's not to say that they all had great experiences and enjoyed the way education was delivered, but we literally did not let one student fall through the cracks. And I'm so proud of everyone in our district that made that possible. And the folks that you just mentioned were right at the front of that effort.
And we're talking about how many students in the Hudson School District now?
About 5,600, give or take.
That's crazy. That's just crazy. Yeah. So anyway, before we finish, Dave, is there one thing that you would want people, or a couple things you want people in Hudson to know, not just parents, but the rest of us who have, our kids have all benefited from the Hudson School District, but going forward, or that you want the community to know about what the district is doing and their plans?
Sure, and thank you for that question. I think the number one thing we want our community to know is that we care deeply and we take our responsibility incredibly seriously, and we are going to work tirelessly to make sure that we meet the needs of all of our students, and in doing so are responsive to the needs of the community. We so appreciate the support we have from our community. We know, I just told all the new teachers of Hudson the other day, We have a community that believes in our schools. We have a community that values education. And we take that trust that the community has placed in us very seriously, and we will live up to those expectations.
That's great. And just before I let you go, in terms of testing and all of that, how is that working with the district?
Great question. So we believe that our assessments are critical, but testing needs to be reconsidered in the way it's handled. So we go through a process of called prioritizing our standards. So we have our standards. They define what students need to know or what they should be able to do at any point in the instructional sequence or at the end of a school year. And it's important that we understand how students are operating. So we will be modifying the way we assess students, but assessment is still critical. And in many ways, more so than ever. Goes back to that same thing I just said, exacerbating inequities. We can't let students fall through the cracks. And one way we make sure that we don't is that we pay close attention to their progress. Now, we know that we wouldn't expect the same growth we would typically have in a typical year, but we do expect students still to grow, and we will work hard to make sure they do that. But assessment is important. Now, there's still debates at the state level in terms of some of the standardized testing, what will happen. We'll let them work through that, and then we'll make sure that our students are learning.
The pandemic is a great equalizer. Everybody's in the same boat, kind of.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
It's not like your kid's going to get ahead of our kid or whatever. Talking about the other kind of testing, the COVID testing, where does that? What is the district requiring in terms of notification if someone has symptoms or is exposed?
Sure. So we have a very detailed protocol, both for students that may be exposed or staff. We're working through trying to offer a flexible option for teachers. We know that obviously keeping our buildings staffed is critical and at risk. Because of forced quarantines and so forth, we may find ourselves in situations where we're needing substitute teachers that are difficult to find. But the protocol for testing is handled primarily by the county in terms of contact tracing, that sort of thing. But we've partnered with our local healthcare agencies, and they've been wonderful. So it's essentially following the guidelines from the Department of Health and Human Services and a series of pretty detailed protocols that are outlined in our blueprint in terms of the testing. And we are interested in partnering with our healthcare providers to ensure that if a teacher is required to test, that we could expedite that, because we know that that does impact the entire community if we have to start closing classrooms. Fortunately for us, it seems that the testing backlog has picked up, and testing, it seems to be about 3 to 4 days now where people are able to get results. So that is helpful. When it was extending beyond that, we were concerned.
Yeah. Well, going forward, let's hope that 2020 and 2021 are good years and years that they are sometime that we'll see the virus, we'll see a vaccine or whatever. And it sounds like the district has a pretty good plan. You'll be keeping people apprised if things change, I'm assuming, along the way.
Yes, absolutely. Communication is key. We'll be communicating very regularly, not only to families, but also to the community through some of our quarterly brochures and alike in the newsletters.
Yeah. It was good to get the calendar. It's a good sign.
Everyone loves the calendar. Yeah.
Everybody loves the calendar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dave. We appreciate all the information, and we wish you all very well on this incredibly important and essential work.
Thank you very much, Meg. Appreciate the time.